I want to talk about this book a little bit before he actually gets here because there is so much wisdom kind of contained in these pages. I can't recommend it enough. I've been a couple of books with my wife back on the case in regards to finding these books for us. It just feels like there's a quality of book you guys are getting. I hope you guys get a chance to check it out. Okay. One of the things he talked about that isn't directly related to sound, but is a more generalized note, but he was directly relating it to sound, is we all know what it means to evangelize, to spread the good word on something. However, what a lot of people don't understand is the best form of evangelization is not simply saying to people what you want to say. It's the thing itself. It's called evangelism by example, or you become an example evangelist. I'll put it this way. Stop telling people what they already know. Because one of the stories later on in the book, one of the stories that happens later on in the book is that there is a woman named Lisa Lavia who actually moves from America over to this town in England and is brought on to this, well, this is such a funny thing, the Abatement Society, the Noise Abatement Society. She's brought on to this organization that while this town is vibrant, has a lot of fun stuff going on, noise is actually killing the community because a lot of the late night behavior, while fun, is getting more rowdy, is getting more nasty, and she is brought in and makes a terrific suggestion about actually increasing the volume of the district, of the, I guess you would call it the adult play district, the place where adults go to play. You know, it's kind of like City Walk across from Universal Studios. The kids go to Universal Studios, and then in the evening, everybody makes their way over to City Walk. Every city has a nighttime place to play. The problem was that it was getting rowdy, it was getting nasty, and while the people who lived down there loved the sounds of the night, what they didn't love was the sounds of danger, the sounds of unpleasantness, the sounds of cacophony. So what they kind of ended up coming up with, they couldn't afford to do it in the end, but it did work as an experiment. They increased the volume down there, but they increased the volume with more calming sounds, not Samanek sounds. I don't want to make this really clear. They actually played certain songs louder than they would normally play them. It actually led to better outcomes and all that kind of stuff. But the thing was, when this woman, Lisa Lavia, first joined the Noise Abatement Society, what she found was she thought she would have to go around and get public awareness up about how bad the sound was in the community, how damaging it was, not just from a place of noise pollution, because one of the things that Berdik's book does is he says there's been too much of a focus on decibels. Everybody knows about the danger of decibels. But one of the things that she says, it's not so much the wrong sounds, but it's the wrong time. That's the big thing we've got to somehow manage. And Berdik seems to suggest something like that too, that most sounds are not bad. What throws us off about sounds is when they come at inopportune moments. If I'm making sense there, I'm sure you dig where I'm coming from. The idea that there are times that you hear a horn, it doesn't bug you at all. Other times when you hear a horn, it could surprise you. It could be inappropriate. But when the sound doesn't match up with the moment, that's what causes the problems. But to kind of get back to this idea of being an example evangelist, which means you're not preaching the good word, you're living the good word. So they went around the entire community to, kind of get on top of the sound problem in the community. And she thought she'd have to educate people about this, right? Well, every place they went, everybody knew there was a sound problem. Every single person knew it. They didn't have to tell them. As a matter of fact, you can make a case that learned helplessness, in fact, had creeped in, which is a crazy thing. I don't know if you know about learned helplessness, but that's when something happens and you just kind of accept that's the reality of it. So once they figured out that everybody knew there was a sound problem, they then realized the next problem is that everybody, when there's a problem, articulates a problem that everybody already understands. What they do then is they then tell people what they should do, which is also not a good step, because telling people what they should do, many of them know they should do it. They don't have the money, the resources, or the time. And then they start telling people what they would do in that situation. Well, when people hear you say that you have a solution and you're telling them what they should do, your solution should be your solution and not their solution. Do you follow me? Am I making a little bit of sense here, folks, in the sense that often when you tell people, you know what you should do, how many times have you wanted to tell somebody when they tell you what you should do, you want to tell them you should do that? Because 9 out of 10 times, they're not doing that. How about that? They're not doing that. So you say to them, you should do that. And if you start doing it, you then become the evangelist by example. The example evangelist. You are the one abating the sound. And it applies to everything in life, that the first place you should begin with the change is with yourself. I know it sounds so simple, but it's like a checklist, isn't it? You know, everybody knows we have a problem with hours of service. And everybody is telling everybody else what they should do. And everybody's telling everybody what they would do if they were them. But nobody is doing the thing itself. And there are ways, even with the bad HOSs that we have right now, that you can actually figure out solutions and give examples of how you can manage your hours of service. Plenty of folks do, by the way. I don't know, guys, if you know this, Junker texts me every morning about his whereabouts and his locations. Always love hearing from him. Many of you do, too. Many of you guys are evangelists by example in how you manage your hours of service and your sleep. And that's a really groovy thing, if you dig where I'm coming from. 615-292-6366. I want to pivot here for a second and actually remind you guys that this sports report is brought to you by ShadyRays.com. Cut down on the glare of the hype with Shady Rays, lost and broken protection game plans. Their custom service and their knowledge, like a good major league team, is first rate. By the way, they've got your back. Do I got a Chris Berdik on the phone?
100%, but here's what's funny. The poor girl's number that we had, she's got some voicemails. So I have Chris on the phone. We're hanging out with him. I highly appreciate him being able to join us today.
Hey, Chris, good morning, man. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I am fine. And we've been talking about your book for the last 10 minutes or so, my producer and I, until you graciously gave us a call. Appreciate that as well. This book is terrific. My wife is a sound designer along with being the programming director over here. And, of course, given what we do for a living, we're obsessed with sound. I've already done your introductions, by the way, so people know who you are and they know the book is called Clamor.
Sure.
But in going through the book, there was so much that, so much that I understood. There were a lot of aha moments. But I really wanted to talk about the end of the book as well with Lisa Lavia, because I found that whole idea of solving a problem by actually engaging with the problem and figuring out kind of counter solutions really amazing. But before we get to that, can you kind of talk about the overall project of the book? Because there is a 30,000-foot view before we dig into specific examples. And good morning, by the way.
And good morning to you. So the book began with a kind of just a bit of fascination. I was assigned a story for the Boston Globe Sunday magazine to do a feature about a noise researcher, a public health researcher at the Harvard School of Public Health who was focused on noise. And I hadn't really thought about noise as a pollution or a public health issue until then. I started to see all this epidemiology connecting noise exposure to not just hearing loss, but to cardiovascular disease risk and hypertension and diabetes. And you kind of run down the list. There was this impact, and what struck me was how could we have such a huge public health impact from something that people can't even understand or agree on the definition of it. So I started to kind of push that a bit. I did some more magazine stories, and it kept being interesting to me. And just to complete this thought, when I started working on the book, COVID hit, and all of a sudden, the roads were empty and nobody was hanging out together and the skies were clear and businesses were shuttering and, it was a catastrophe, but it was also quieter. And it made me realize that quiet is not just an end in of itself, that there's context that really matters to any kind of soundscape, whether it's stillness and silence or lots of sound and noise, context really matters. So that kind of gave the book its shape.
I want to say something. As I was reading the book and we got to some of the passages on silence, and you're quick to point out that some people have this blessed rage for silence. They desperately want it. They think they want it. They think they know what it is. But I've got two examples from both my movie watching life and my actual life. The first of which is silence can be a pretty terrifying thing, as 28 Days Later has proven on numerous rewatchings. The second thing is that my family lost everything during Hurricane Katrina. The levees broke, and my mom and dad got 13 feet of water in 30 minutes, along with 60 first cousins, aunts, uncles, and beyond. We returned to the neighborhood, Chris, and I was so unnerved in the immediate aftermath when I actually got back into the city a few days later to kind of do a tour of what had happened. My dad was the first to point out when we were over at the lakefront community. I'm like, what is that sound? I heard this dark, low whisper in the background, and he said every bit of white noise is gone. Every stoplight, every car, every bird. What you're hearing is the lake.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
and it completely unnerved me. And you talk about the idea that sound is all context. That great quote towards the end. It's not a matter of the wrong sounds. It's the wrong sounds at the wrong time. And so much of the book really examines that. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair, for sure.
So can you kind of talk a little bit about, and like I said, talk a little bit about what the public health crisis that is actually being engendered here by noise pollution, that it's deeper and darker than people imagine?
Yeah. So the first part is hearing loss, and this is just a numbers game where the estimates are that there are about 1.5 billion people on the planet now who have some degree of hearing loss, and that is a mix of aging and noise exposure. And the projections are that could rise to 2.5 billion people in 2050. And the way that we measure hearing loss is with an audiogram. They kind of put the beeps on, different frequencies, and then you raise your hand when you hear it. The thing about the audiogram, it's a screening tool. It doesn't really measure hearing. We don't go through life just to detect beeps. We have to understand what we're hearing, differentiate one voice from another. Hearing is a really complicated task that involves our brains as much as our ears, and that part of the connections between our brains and our ears involves a bunch of little nerve endings in our inner ear, and those start to get damaged well before the audiogram starts to show anything. And so you have another level of hearing loss that people are not even measuring. So then you get into sleep disturbance and stress, and that can happen well below the decibel range that will hurt your ears. That's just kind of your hearing is like a evolutionary defense mechanism, because when you close your eyes at night, you're sleeping, your ears are still awake and they're listening for things. And when they hear something, they perk up, and it perks up your entire body. Your resting heart rate raises again, your blood pressure goes up again, and your cortisol starts pumping. And when that happens on a chronic way, that is kind of what cascades into things like cardiovascular disease and those sorts of impacts. So these are systemic issues that we don't realize when we just have noise in our ears for a time and we're annoyed, but then it goes away and we forget about it.
It's interesting, by the way, we talk about this with truckers all the time, that if you're thirsty, it's already too late, and if you are tired, it's already too late. I didn't realize this until going through this book. By the time you start having hearing problems, the damage has been going on for quite a while before you actually start to realize what has happened. Is that fair?
Yeah, because if a lot of people will say, that they can hear you when you're trying to talk to them, but they can't understand you. And what's going on there is that, the ears are intact enough, the hair cells inside the inner ear, the cochlea, are intact enough to detect the sound. But those connections that kind of do that fine-grained work of differentiating the sound, localizing it, those have started to go already. And those go, like I said, before the audiogram will tell you, you will, think, okay, I've got fine hearing, I'm clear, but there's damage underway already. And there's been a lot of research into mice with this. It's harder to do this kind of research on humans because you have to be dead for them to get into your inner ear to that degree. But mice research on this has been pretty extensive and shown how much damage can be done before something like an audiogram will pick it up.
I had a chance many years ago to make a friend in Terry Hanratty, the former NFL quarterback, and he was the first one to turn me on to this idea. The idea that the people who are getting older, often people think they're in early stages of dementia. People often think that they're actually having, a whole lot of problems that aren't actually caused by dementia or, in fact, Alzheimer's, but in fact, people are isolating themselves and shutting their brain down because they can't hear the world around them. Is that a fair way to kind of put that?
That is a possibility that some researchers at Johns Hopkins in particular have been looking at, where they've just been doing the correlations. So you look at people who have mild hearing loss, who double the risk of having dementia, and that is the kind of probable cause, which is you can't hear people, you can't engage, you withdraw, you start to, as you say, shut down your brain. You just are not exercising that muscle, and that can, potentially increase your risk of dementia and depression.
Yeah, and that goes back to the synaptic connections you talked about too. The idea that it's like, we've got to be able, like you said, I can hear you, but I don't understand you. Is often an issue with people as they get older, but often an issue with a lot of people who have hearing problems. Like I said, it's a hearing problem. It's not a lack of hearing. It's the inability to kind of connect what one is hearing to the brain to then process the information to do what is necessary in response. I wanted to pivot for a second too, because like I said, that last part of that book, when we got over to that British town, was gave me a lot of hope, as a matter of fact. There's a line from there that says it's not necessarily done intentionally, but it can be done intentionally. And one of the other things that kind of I realized in reading the book, how deeply important in urban settings green space is. Can you kind of talk about the idea of the impact of public planning, not just with parks, but where we put traffic lights, where we put subway tunnels, where we put anything that creates sound in particular ways, how we angle buildings, all of that. Urban planning is more and more getting at least studied from a point of how do we basically create the best soundscape that we possibly can.
Yeah, well, from your lips to God's ears, that's kind of the goal, right? Right now, a lot of time urban planning is done with, modeled decibels, and then that they kind of do that at the end, and then they call it a day. But the idea is, and they're creating these tools so that you could do a simulation auditory of say a commercial district that you're creating, and how are you going to situate where the bus stop is going to be. Is it going to be right next to the park where you want people to be relaxing? Is it going to be a block away? How are you going to have the air conditions? Are they going to all be in the back of the buildings? Are they going to be on the top of them? How is that going to affect the sound of the people that are walking down the street trying to have conversations? So these are all kind of the whole idea being that you are doing sound-aware design. And when I went to Brighton in England, I was walking with Lisa Lavia, who is managing director of the UK Noise Abatement Society. It's kind of like the big noise control group there.
It's such a British name, too. It is such a British
right?
name. I mean, it's like the Noise Abatement Society. I just love that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's true. But we were walking through a park, a beautiful park, between rows of kind of Italianate row houses going down to the sea there. And at the top of the park was a really busy stretch of road, and there was a bus stop there where one after another the bus would come in with the kind of growl of the diesel engine, and it would idle there for a while while people got on and off and had that wheeze of the hydraulic brakes and all that. And, of course, the regular traffic also making a bunch of noise. And so what happened was at the top of the park, nobody was there. Nobody, the benches were empty, the grass, completely vacant. And then as you went down, the landscaping changed. So you had a bit of a berm that kind of blocked the sound. You had more trees. You were just farther away, obviously, from the road. And you had a water feature down there that made its own masking sound. And so you saw people there sitting there enjoying the park, walking their dogs, saying hi to one another, joggers laying out in the grass having a rest. You realize that the park is there for those purposes. And when you design it without thinking about how the sound can impact those purposes, then you've missed something. And so that's kind of the idea. She said that was sort of maybe not done on purpose because this is a park that was built and designed 150 years ago, but it can be done on purpose. You can think about these things ahead of time.
The other thing is, and you kind of alluded to this earlier too, is that you also you never leave out the fact that this is all interconnected. This isn't simply an issue of sound, but like I said, the wrong sounds, not the wrong sounds, but the wrong time often. And so some of these attempts to kind of figure this all out often involve the replication of other sensory realities, and the idea that you'll get like certain scents are introduced, certain contexts are introduced, certain textures are introduced into the environment in an attempt to replicate. Because I got to tell you, as a guy who loves cities, every once in a while, the slight smell of gasoline, the background of a jackhammer, followed by walking by a bodega where there's some music coming out, then going around the corner to a bit more quiet, it can be a lovely sort of landscape. And they point out also that there are people who like to live. We talked to Mark Graney, the author, who was doing an interview with us from a porch in Washington, D.C., where the city was coming to life. That made him happy. So this isn't,
Sure.
And you have there's another great line, too, about the idea that this is subjective but not arbitrary. Can you unpack that as well, too? I thought that was groovy.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so, I mean, the idea is that noise is famously subjective, and people will often take that as kind of like, oh, it's like a personal taste sort of thing. And my point is that there is a lot of, there are layers here. You have certainly the influence of how we interpret sound will be based on our upbringing, our cultural background, our mood in any given day. That's all true. But below that, there are certain things that connect us as humans. We have shared vulnerabilities in our inner ear in terms of that anatomy there that does so amazing, but it is kind of vulnerable to loud sounds. We have a shared connection, a hair trigger between our hearing and our fight or flight reactions. And we have limited ability to focus our attention on multiple things. So when the signals are coming at us, and a lot of sounds are just that, they're just signals, we can only handle so much. We all need sleep. and there are all these things that connect us in our reactions to sound that mix with that kind of personalized, subjective piece of it. So it's both of those things.
In the limited time we have left here, by the way, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate you making the time for us. I do want to say one of the other things the book does is that it challenges the idea that this is simply about decibels. This is almost kind of like, people cutting out fat in the 70s. Yes, people should cut down on fat, but you have to be careful that thinking that there is a magic bullet to this situation. And for too long, the reduction of decibels became kind of the holy grail of all of this in regards to audio, figuring out audio damage here. That's not the entire case, is it? There's a lot more at play than just decibels and changing that narrative. Is it fair to say, once again, that that's one of the points of the book, to change that narrative a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. You have, on the sort of negative side, like what is bothering us about sound, you have things like duration. There's these new data centers going up everywhere all the time. And the sound that people have a problem with there is not super loud, but it goes on 24/7 because those servers need to be cooled all the time, or they're going to overheat. And the sound is coming into these people's houses low frequency. You can kind of feel it in your chest. Again, that's nothing to do with decibels, and it's happening, and it's coming in all the time. So that's kind of the negative piece. But on the positive side, there are so many sounds out there that we love, that give us restoration and that give us joy, and we want to hear those things. And when we talk about a certain loudness level, that's all that decibels are. It's just the acoustic energy intensity of a sound. It doesn't tell us whether that acoustic energy is from the babbling brook and the birds as we walk, or it's from an annoying buzz of a drone flying over our head. Those could both be the same decibel level, but they'll have very different impacts on us.
We're going to run out of time here. I'm going to say it again, by the way. Clamor, how noise took over the world and how we can take it back. And by the way, as he points out, the book is not a slog through a gloom and doom sort of scenario. It's an absolute celebration of sound as well, and a really enjoyable read, along with getting the science so very right. You guys can go to Chris Berdik, that's BERDIK.com, to find out more about this author. What are you working on next, other than doing the hitting the hustings for the book?
Well, right now I'm doing most of that, and I'm trying to come up with the next topic that's worthy of a book. So I'm a freelancer. I'm omnivorous. I've been doing some work writing about education and ed tech. So that's kind of my my grab bag right now.
And by the way, I have to ask this question. This book is available on Audible, is it not?
It sure is.
As you probably guessed, the majority of our listeners, one of whom actually has 600 Audible books under his belt since he became a truck driver. It's a very important part of their thing. The other thing is, I don't know if you were aware of this, but when they tried, it was the technology was too expensive, but it worked. When they tried to fix the comfort of people sitting down in trucks, Bose actually came up with technology that completely worked for it. They realized that the vibrations that were happening to truck drivers inside of the cab were reduced by using Bose speaker technology to kind of offset the long, low rumble. And the number of people who actually drive in this profession who actually have had damage, and I'm talking about incremental 20, 30, 40-year damage, and proving it's interconnected, because so much of that is about the shaking that goes on as much as it's about the hearing. And that's one of the other final notes I wanted to make. The book talks about the way other things can damage our hearing outside of just straight sound, because it understands what sound is. I'll give you the last word.
Well, I just want to say, we will never be free of noise in this world, and I don't think we should aspire to be. But I think if we think about sound broadly and proactively, there's lots of ways that we can, make our world sound not just less bad, but potentially better. So that's my last word.
Thank you very much. As I said, a good-sounding world is a good-sounding world to me, because I have to talk on the radio for extended periods of time. I hope it sounds pretty good. Thank you so much, Chris. You're welcome back anytime you got something else cooking, okay?
All right, appreciate it. Thanks so much.